Hello and welcome to Humble Beginnings, in which we take a detailed look at the starting area of a game to analyse exactly what it does well, to set up game mechanics, themes, or anything of interest for aspiring developers. We kick this series off with the instant cult classic, Undertale. Now, because this series aims to look at the very beginning of the game, doesn't exactly mean there won't be any potential spoilers, so this is the mandatory spoiler warning. Undertale begins with a cinematic to set the theme and very beginning of the game. You're introduced as a child and you've fallen face first down a dark pit into assumingly the world of monsters. The very start of the game can come across as a little unsettling. The way the text jitters when typing out your name and the way the atmospheric music hums away in the background. You fall straight into the game, if you'll excuse my pun, and progress through the halls until you encounter Flowey. Now, there's quite a few clever things that the player is introduced with this very first fight. So, from the get-go the player is taught that projectiles are in fact bad, or friendliness pellets as they're called. And there's the freedom of movement inside the square. So Flowey literally tells you, you are the heart, and as you move around, that's you. The core gameplay mechanic is introduced all there inside a vacuum. Obviously you do take damage, so it's not safe, but it's quite hard for the player to die unless they're intentionally trying to die. This also introduces Toriel, saving the player at the last moment, protecting us from evil. She saved you. She's now your mum. Congratulations. One of the most important things I think Undertale does inside the beginning is subvert standard RPG tutorials. It uses this subversion to develop characters. So once you are introduced to Toriel, you come across multiple puzzles and situations where Toriel takes your hand to guide them through, lead them through it, and reinforcing the fact that she's a mother-like figure. Or what, attempting to be. The entire room with spikes is the perfect example. It's kind of refreshing to see these puzzles in the game that are intentionally placed there to seem dangerous, but rather than actually force the player to go through them, they're solved easily and develop Toriel's character. We then come across the dummy, which is an entirely safe place to learn the rest of the combat mechanics. In the encounter with Flowey, we learn that players move their heart around to avoid getting hit. Now against the dummy, it's about talking to solve fights. Players are shown the fighting interface and that they have all the time they need to look around. It also introduces the classic fight button that most RPG players are used to, but those who know the core of Undertale is the ability to solve fights without killing a single thing. So Toriel has recommended the player solve this fight by talking, and as by doing it you see, oh okay, I don't have to fight. Into the next always players have their first random encounter. Again, this is to teach the player to expect random encounters when walking about. Room by room mechanics are cleverly added inside the tutorial space of the game. So while it may seem that the encounter was a good chance to sort of have Toriel come in and appear more motherly again, it does work at that, but it's more about getting the player used to the game's mechanics. Random encounters. Tick. Following rooms support and continue to build the idea of Toriel being motherly, the way she tests your independence or persistently calls to check up on the player. See now, once Toriel leaves the player, that is when they can first truly experience random encounters and fights on their own, which instantly throws different projectile types as opposed to what Flower is throwing at the player. So they instantly have to learn that, oh, different enemies have different projectile types. It's, again, teaching the player bit by bit. Another nice touch is the room with the candy bowl, which is a very simple way of telling the player how to access their inventory without just throwing it in their face at the screen at the start. So you literally, once you pick up the candy, it literally tells you to go into your menu, which you wouldn't know how to do otherwise. It's just, rather than just telling the player, it's the player's done something and they learn. Other examples would be the sign, that once you read it, it tells you how to read the sign, which on paper is counterintuitive, but I imagine that it's again a way of poking fun at traditional RPGs. For a first time player, Undertale has tried to ease and condition the player to spare whenever possible. Speaking of the frog, it reinforces this idea. You're meant to show mercy whenever possible, or at least that's what the game is trying to teach. The calls from Toriel about the pie, or the talking rock, sets up the type of comedy that's common throughout Undertale. If you're well behaved and not a killer, obviously if you're a killer then you don't really get as many jokes in the future, you just get sadness. It all feels quite light-hearted and merry, like a typical adventure game. Napstablook, if I've said that right, is the first encounter where Mercy playthroughs must deal with multiple stages of a fight, using multiple cheers and then dodging the projectiles out of 4. The difficulty progression is honestly well done inside Undertale, because anyone who is entirely new to the game gets eased into the game's mechanics. The previous fight the player encountered, it's possible to only have had one round of dodging projectiles. With the Napstablook, you have multiple rounds, which again, it gets to play used to everything. You're learning as you're playing, it's fun, you're having fun. The spiderweb room sets up future encounters, which players don't see the impact of their choice until much later on in the game. One thing I should point out that couldn't be helped though, is the frog room that just follows on, where frogs essentially fill the gaps of the controls just by simply telling you them. It is tough to suitably teach a player everything they need to know, even like the button to make you full screen, so you can't knock it. At least some comedy is interjected at points rather than just a wall of text, but I must admit this is probably the weakest example of teaching that Undertale uses within the tutorial space. The next room where the player has to fall down the correct hole to find a swatch. In one of the holes is a rooted plant. See, now this, for the more explorative of players, might cause them to try and interact, which is a nice way of rewarding players for their exploring. In that fight, players are introduced to useful projectiles, like green ones that replenish the player's health as opposed to damaging them. It's all these little things that Undertale does to reinforce the steady increase in complexity and to set the player up for playing the game and being used to encounters. Also, it was taught that falling down the hole tends to not have too much of a consequence. 9 times out of 10, if you do fall down the hole, you just kind of have to repeat your progress, which is nice. The puzzle room with the coloured switches that constantly rotates is a nice puzzle. But one clever thing that to happen within some of the encounters that the player will face is 2 monsters instead of just 1. So while the players are dealing with the puzzle, they're introduced to facing 2 monsters at once now in a relatively safe space, so it doesn't seem as daunting or surprising in the future, getting used to 2 different projectile types at the same time. Beyond that, we reach Toriel's home, where more motherly actions take place, and you really begin to get a feel for her as a character, with even some emotional investment. It really seems that she cares for you, with the way that she bakes, sets up her bedroom for you, and all that, which somewhat makes the moment when you ask to leave a little heartbreaking. The instant reveal of Undertale being an adventure game seems a little bit off now as you follow her through the tunnels where the music has died, and the way she's talking to you about children dying before and stuff like that, it's a little jarring. Now the fight with Toriel, on the other hand, is one of the most important in the game. The result changes so much, and it's the first case for the player where persistence is key. Any attempts of talking to her is met with nothing, so you simply must spare her again and again and again until she gives up. Or of course you could stab her repeatedly and win that way, but that's not what you want. Multiple players have come out and said that they didn't know what else to do, because once they tried sparing her, nothing happened. They tried talking to her, nothing happened. So simply killed her because everything they had been taught up to that point hadn't been enough to know that they need to do more sparing. And I can understand why that can be frustrating from players, but I guess if you think about it thematically, why would Toriel just let you spare her? She wants you to prove yourself and doesn't want you to actually leave her. So it is a bit of a toss-up, because when you do spare her, it doesn't exactly say that it isn't working. And it definitely gives you more feedback than when you just try and talk to her. It's one of the things that you just need to go with the gut feeling, or kill her and deal with the consequences of that. After the fight, the player has a long corridor to walk down and sort of reflect on their actions, which is similar to Metal Gear Solid with the long ladder room, which players just walk down, which kind of gave you a long time to be like, oh, that's what I've done. And then after that, we become full circle with a talk with Flowey, who berates the player for the result of the Toriel fight, once again hinting at multiple playthroughs. Which I should say now, if you do have played Undertale, and you haven't done multiple playthroughs, you might notice some weird things. Now after that, you exit the ruins, and then you get the Undertale title screen. And it's honestly what I would consider the end of the beginning of Undertale, if that makes sense. And that's that. There's a lot going on, and I hope my breaking down each important stage has showcased some of the smart design choices inside. I mean, if there's any obvious ones I've missed, please leave a comment below and let me know. This is going to be a learning experience for you and me, hopefully. The same goes for any games that you want me to look into. I'm honestly open to any suggestion under the sun. Well, this has been the first episode of Humble Beginnings. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys all next time. Bye.